So you did it. You installed World of Warcraft Classic and now you're sitting here with the rest of us waiting in queue. Well, welcome to everyone's life, but we can take that time to make some choices. And today we're going to be talking about race choices in World of Warcraft. More specifically, the alliance races. First, I'm simply going to go through the different race traits, relatively unopinionated, and then we're going to look into the different classes that can work well with those particular traits. A bit of background on myself, my name's DukeSloth and I used to play World of Warcraft Vanilla back from the final beta until Burning Crusade came out, so I really only played the time when this particular information was relevant. And I'd also like to shout out Punkrat on YouTube and Perculia on Wowhead because they made some listings that added some information that I wasn't aware of, and now I can summarize that and also, of course, add a little bit of my own opinion. So let's get into the racials. We begin with the most basic one, Human Alliance. This one has 5 racials. The first one being Diplomacy, which increases your reputation gain by 10%. So if you're after reputation grinding for any faction in the game, this will help you a little bit. They also have 2 weapon specializations. One is Sword Specialization, increasing your skill with swords and two-handed swords by 5. And the other one is a Mace Specialization, increasing your skill with maces and two-handed maces by 5 as well. In addition to that, they also have a skill called Perception, which dramatically increases the stealth detection for 20 seconds with a 3-minute cooldown. And last but not least, they also have the Human Spirit, which increases their spirit by 5%. The next alliance race, Dwarves, comes with 4 racials. First one is Find Treasure, allows the dwarves to sense nearby treasure, making it appear on the minimap. Then they have Frost Resistance, increases frost resistance by 10. They also have Gun Specialization, increasing the gun skills by 5. And then they have Stone Form. While active, grants immunity to bleed, poison, and disease effects. In addition, armor increased by 10%, lasts for 8 seconds, 3-minute cooldown. Night Elves come with 4 racials. First one is Nature Resistance, increasing nature resistance by 10. The second one is Spirit Wisp, transforms into a wisp upon death, increasing movement speed by 50%. Third one is Quickness, dodge chance increased by 1%. And the fourth one is Shadow Melt, activate to slip into the shadows, reducing the chance for enemies to detect your presence, lasts until cancelled or upon moving. Night Elf Rogues and Druids with Shadow Melts are more difficult to detect while stealthing or prowling. And as the last alliance race, we have the Gnomes. They have 4 racials, the first one being Arcane Resistance, which increases their Arcane Resistance by 10. The second one is Expansive Mind, increasing their Intelligence by 5%. Third one is Engineering Specialization, increasing their Engineering skill by 15. And the fourth one is Escaped Artist, allowing you to escape the effect of any immobilization or movement speed reduction effect. Now that we have an overview of all alliance racials, let's discuss the classes for alliance. But before we do that, a quick reminder that race and class choices will always come down to personal preference. I'm talking about this from a perspective of some min-maxing and how things can work better, but at the end of the day, every class that is available for a race can be played with them in one way or another. For example, even if a class may not be ideal for gnomes, it could still be beneficial to simply be a small gnome that is harder to target in some situations. Likewise, while not all perks are incredibly useful for late game, think for example the Wisp Spirit for the Night Elves or also the Underwater Breathing for the Undeads, those perks still have their place. They can be very useful while leveling up, while playing the game and experiencing the game. And for many, that is the key point. Not everyone is looking to hardcore PvE late game content where these perks are super important, or for PvP on that level where it actually becomes relevant. So follow your heart's desire and only really look towards these things if you're either looking to min-max or if you're just torn between 2 races because you're not sure about some specifics here. And also, if you're enjoying the video so far, it would much appreciate it if you click the sub button, that really helps me out. Now let's look at the humans. Humans are a very strong all-rounder that is pretty good for many classes. The first one that is worth mentioning here is the Warrior. And with the Warrior, I'd like to point out that pretty much any race has a reason to play Warrior in one way or another, and this basically includes Alliance and Horde. It's not always toe-to-toe in every aspect, but some races are good for PvP warriors, others are good for PvE warriors, and some are good for both. When it comes to humans, they are especially good for PvE because they have the weapon specializations, allowing them to work a bit better against higher level mobs because the specialization allows them to have a little bit of a higher hit chance. And this is relevant in raids where you will have targets that are simply above your level when you're max level. It is less relevant for PvP because in late game everyone is on the same level, but they still have perception there, which allows them to work a bit better against stealth characters, so they're not a terrible choice either. And the exact same thing goes for rogues here as well. If you're running a mace or sword build in PvE as a rogue, then you most certainly will benefit a lot from being a human, and also for PvP they have at least an okay ratio. Another class that is definitely interesting here are priests. Due to the human spirit, your spirit being increased by 5%, you have some extra mana generation, which is already nice, but it also benefits the spiritual guidance of the holy priest, meaning that your spell damage and healing is increased by up to 25% of your total spirit. So having more spirit obviously helps that. With only 2 races being able to play paladin in the first place, that is most certainly worth mentioning here as well. Human paladins are generally ones that I would prefer for PvE. They have those specializations that we already talked about that can most certainly be useful, and as such, they can really be used for any kind of paladin playstyle that you want here for retribution, holy prot. It can definitely fit in. And again, we also have to say that generally perception is a decent skill in PvP, so that can again be considered at least. When it comes to warlocks and mages, you only have one alternative, so it's definitely worth discussing here. It at the end of the day depends on how much you value the human spirit, so spirit for those classes depending on your spec as well, and how much you value perception. You will also make, of course, use of diplomacy, but you probably won't do much with the specializations. Now let's move on to dwarves. They have quite a few strange ratios. Find treasure is generally hard to use because often you will have mining or herbalism, which means you cannot use find treasure at the same time. And when it comes to farming gold, there are better options than looking for treasure anyway. So depending on how populated your server is, it may make a little bit of a difference, but I generally wouldn't recommend picking them for that. Frost resistance is also super situational, like every other resistance really. It benefits you in some specific situations against some specific specs or specific dungeons that you're going into, but it's just not something that would overall be strong or weak in my opinion, with any resistance really. And gun specialization is also arguably not that great because a lot of the good weapons in the game are simply bows. Of course, that depends on what you're intending to do. If you're full-on cosplaying that classic WoW dwarf hunter, then maybe you enjoy that a little bit more. But what it comes down to with dwarves is mainly Stoneform. Stoneform is extremely strong because it not only removes certain negative effects, but also increases your armor, which just works very, very well for some classes. The first one here is the warrior, of course. Stoneform is great for tanking and for PvP, removing those negative effects there. So yeah, don't really need to explain that any further. PvE, PvP, anything goes. For rogues, this is also great in PvP specifically. Removing any dot effects on you while you're trying to get away from the enemy with stealth is fantastic. For hunters, you can again make a case for Stoneform for PvP specifically. As I said, the gun specialization is held back a little bit by the overwhelming amount of bows in the game. And then dwarves are also the second race for paladins, which is pretty solid because of the Stoneform ability as well. Arguably a fair bit better for PvP than for PvE, but both works really. And then we have the really big deal of the dwarves, which are priests. That is due to the fact that they get their class-specific racials. And this one is huge. It's Fear Ward. Fear Ward allows a dwarven priest to shield an ally from the next fear effect used against them for 10 minutes. Sounds strong? Yes, it is. And it also only has a 30-second cooldown. Along with that, they also have Desperate Prayer, an instant self-heal with a 10-minute cooldown, so not too terrible either. But Fear Ward is what really stands out here. This ability is great in both certain PvE encounters as well as most certainly in PvP, and often makes dwarves the preferred race for priests. And that brings us to Night Elves. They have nature resistance, which again I think is kind of situational, doesn't really help in general, helps in specific matchups and specific situations, but it's not really worth taking into consideration that much. Wind Spirit, again, also kind of gimmicky, but can be nice while leveling. But the perks that you really want to look at here are quickness, increasing the dodge chance, and shadow meld, giving you the ability to slip into the shadows. I think that the dodge chance is nice, at least, but it's not a super crazy perk either in most situations. And shadow meld is most certainly nice on some characters that typically can't make that much use of it, but I don't really see much of a point in having it on rogues and druids in the sense that you can improve your stealth when you use it. Because honestly, if you're playing a druid or a rogue in a way where you have to sneak around enemies, you should be able to do that without getting detected most of the time anyways. This shouldn't be a main struggle outside of maybe duels, but you shouldn't necessarily pick your race just for that. That said, with Alliance, it's your only choice for druids anyways, so it doesn't really matter that much in the end. Another class that is most certainly up for consideration are Hunters. Hunters in the Night Elf section are considered pretty nice for PvE because of their higher base agility. A Dwarf Hunter will start with 19 agility, whereas a Night Elf Hunter will start with 28 agility. So that is a bit of a difference that can most certainly be useful to some extent. In addition to that, Night Elf Hunters are also great for PvP. Here the stealth really shines. You are a ranged class and you suddenly have a way of being detected less than you normally would, and that can make for some charged up surprise attacks, which is most certainly useful, and the extra dodge chance here helps a little bit as well. And for the same reasons, but most definitely to a lesser extent, you can also make a case for the warrior, who just doesn't benefit all that much from being stealthed before he attacks compared to a hunter, but is still decent enough. Not the best choice in my opinion, but also not terrible. Knight of Priest to me don't really have a strong case because there are simply other classes that offer more, and especially having one ability being Star Shards, which doesn't really do much, also doesn't help them at all. And that brings us to the gnomes. First one, Arcane Resistance, again, like all resistances, very situational. Expensive Mind is very interesting for casting classes as it increases your mana pool as well as your chance to crit with spells. The engineering specialization is also not as worthless as some people think. On one hand, of course, it allows you to level engineering faster if you are using that, but on the other hand, it will also spawn certain pets that you can utilize at a higher level because that scales with your skill, so you can effectively spawn a level 63 Dragonling, for example. And an engineer's death rate could potentially scale with this as well, though it's not quite clear if that's going to be the case in World of Warcraft in the classic version. Even without engineering, the gnome has a great tool for PvP in Escape Artist though, which can help in many situations. Mages and warlocks are most certainly worth considering for gnomes due to the intellect, as I said, mana and crit, but again, this depends a little bit on how you want to play, if you want to focus on quick leveling, or if you just want to focus on purely late game crits, PvP, PvE, but overall both choices here are very good. Warriors and rogues both have a case to be made for PvP as well though, and that is due to the Escape Artist, allowing them to get out of situations that would otherwise probably spell death for them. If looking towards any of the classes for PvP, I would definitely recommend getting engineering along with that, just to help you out a little bit more. Outside of that, again, remember that class choice isn't all. If you don't like the character model design of a particular class, there's no point in playing it and looking at it all the time. So go with what you prefer. These are just the useful perks that the classes have. We'll of course be looking at the horde side of that in the near future as well, so make sure to click the sub button if you haven't yet. And with that, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope to see you all for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out.